August 11th, 1973 would be the day. A new sound of music would be born. Hip-hop, and it would be this sound of music that started out as just a back-to-school party but ended up being a global phenomenon. Hip-hop started out as a fun or hobby. Never did these artists feel hip-hop would even be taken as a serious music genre. Well, as we can see, hip-hop took off and no one would expect what was to come. Who would have expected 14 years after the start of hip-hop there would be the first death and many to come? Our first death we will get into is actually the first death in hip-hop. Scott La Rock was 1/3 of the Boogie Down Productions with his then friends KRS-One and D-Nice. Scott was born March 2nd, 1962 and died August 27th, 1987. He was 25 at the time and left behind his son. Now this ain't a bio, so we're gonna start this off at how he got into music. Through a connection of his mother's, La Rock landed a job as a social worker at Franklin Armory Men's Shelter on 166th Street in the Bronx. Funny thing is I currently work at this shelter side bar. At night, though, he spun records at the hip-hop hotspot, the Broadway Repertoire Theater. During his time as a social work, he met KRS-One and from there they clicked up and formed BDP Boogie Down Productions. D-Nice, the third member, was a cousin to one of the guards at the shelter. In '86 they would meet and by '87 their album would be released March 3rd, 1987 being one of New York's first gangster rap albums. Well, he wouldn't have long to celebrate the success of the album because 5 months later on August 27th, 1987 Scott La Rock would be gunned down in his own town of the Bronx trying to break up a situation. Many of the people around that time have their own conspiracies. Some even feel KRS-One himself may have been involved. Scott La Rock's son in an interview once said he had to almost put hands on KRS-One for who he believes knows more about his father's death than he says. Details on death. Details on Scott's death is, he was called by his friend D-Nice, who also was in the group. His friend needed some help with a situation involving a male and female. As Scott and his friend were leaving, bullets got fired through the side and top of the Jeep. La Rock struck his head on the dashboard, not realizing at the time he had been struck by a bullet in the back of his head. He was driven to Lincoln Hospital. He was conscious as he was wheeled into the emergency department, telling doctors he was feeling cold and tired. He died in the operating room. 2 men were arrested, but they were acquitted at trial. R.I.P. Scott La Rock. And it seemed like the Bronx ain't get no better. Our next hip-hop murder would take place almost 2 years later. Mr. Paul C. McCasty, better known as Paul C., was an East Coast hip-hop pioneer, producer, engineer, and mixer in the 1980s. Before his death on July 17, 1989, McCasty gained recognition for his work with notable artists such as Devo, Organized Confusion, Kwame, Queen Latifah, Biz Markie, Ultramagnetic MCs, Rosal, and Eric B. and Rakim. Complex called him one of the most important figures in the development of sampling and Questlove of the Roots called McCasty Dam near the J Dilla of his day. Paul C. was born September 20th, 1964. He got his start in music as a bassist of the pop rock band The Mandolindley Road Show. Band founder and lead singer Lindley Farley said Paul was a historian about pop music and soul music. And that's what informed everything he did. During the band's early years, he studied his brother John's extensive record collection to learn about different genres. The group later recorded a self-titled album at High Five Studios in New York City, which they released in 1985 on Mana Records/Mando Division Music. After the group disbanded, Paul started making beats in a bedroom studio at his family's Rosedale, Queens house. Paul C's status began to grow, and he was hired to work for higher-profile artists. He produced the tracks Run for Cover and Untouchables on Eric B., and Rakim's Let the Rhythm Hit Him. He was planning on producing more songs for the group and also for Queen Latifah, Biz Markie, and Large Professor's group Main Source. But sadly, his life was cut short. On Monday, July 17, 1989, Paul C. was shot to death in Rosedale, Queens, at the age of 24. His murder was featured on America's Most Wanted, leading to the arrest of Derek Littleshine Blair in Fayetteville, North Carolina. A witness who saw two men leave McCaskey's house the night of the murder identified Blair in a lineup 4 months prior to his arrest on Tuesday, February 13, 1990. Blair was also wanted on a Texas warrant for narcotics charges at the time of his arrest. Blair and his brother, another suspect, were both in custody. The police were unable to determine a motive for McCaskey's murder at the time of Blair's arrest, and he faced a maximum jail sentence of 25 years to life. There is no public record of a second arrest ever happening, and Blair was later released due to lack of evidence. Several artists that Paul worked with, including Super Lover C and Casanova Rudd, were questioned as suspects after Paul's murder. They were later cleared of any wrongdoing, but the implication that Super Lover C and Casanova Rudd were involved with Paul's death was damaging to their career. The almighty RSO group gave Paul a ride home after their final session together the night of his murder. They were questioned the next day when they showed up to his house after he didn't come to his scheduled session. The police cleared them the same day after determining they had no involvement in his death. Large Professor spoke about the difficult time after Paul's death, where several collaborators and friends were suspects, saying he got shot up and that's all I knew. Rest in peace, Paul C., and may your legacy live on. This is Hip Hop Murders. Thanks for watching.